Hi, this is JR, and I'll be sharing with you about the phrase "get right with God," a challenge to worshipers of blind conformity. What I mean by "get right with God," I'll address in a moment. And as a brief introductory note, there will be a link where you can see some of the pictures that I'll be referencing occasionally as we proceed. So, get right with God. What does that phrase mean? Of course, the word God has been used by many people in many ways. What does it mean to get right with God? I guess one of the ideas would be that there's something that would be being wrong with God or being out of harmony with God or something like that. And we're not going to really talk about that. We will talk about the worship of customs and the worship of blind conformity. So getting right with God could mean a contrast with being right according to some set of local customs or some set of standards that are conditional standards or relative standards. So being right according to certain standards is fine. We'll address some of how that can be useful. But getting right with God is not just that. So blind conformity to a certain set of local standards or local customs is not getting right with God. That's just conforming to standards, and it can be done blindly, or it can be done with an understanding of why those customs are useful, when they're useful, how they're useful, why they're useful, and so on. So even if the customs are followed, they can be followed out of respect and convenience. For one who's in the mode of, getting right with God doesn't mean disregard for customs. It doesn't mean rebelling against customs. It doesn't necessarily mean conforming to them, because certain customs are specific to certain contexts. But if the customs are followed, they can be followed out of respect and convenience, as distinct from following them blindly out of terror or even out of vanity, which we'll explore in a bit. So we recognize that customs are different from place to place, and customs come and go. They begin and they end. They certainly have their purposes and their importance, but they are not to be worshipped as eternal foundations for human conduct. Customs are just customs. I think to even note something like a particular language. If you are accustomed to speaking English, and then you go to some other foreign country like Texas. No, sorry, like what? Where's a place where people don't speak? And they probably speak, what is it, Mexican in Texas, I think. What else? Where's another place their English wouldn't be like very useful if you were in that place? Help. Brazil. You would want to speak Portuguese if you're in Brazil. And not just any Portuguese, but Brazilian Portuguese, right? Yeah, see? And then if you're in eastern Brazil or western Brazil or northern Brazil, or if you're in the Amazon, then you speak Yamamoto. Is that what they call it there? It's an Amazon tribe, and it's not Portuguese, because they're not like European descent kind of groups. See, so the customs in a particular place are useful for that place. So if you speak English in England, that's cool, right? But if you speak English in the Amazon rainforest to that particular tribe, it might not be very useful. So what's customary can be great, can be useful. It doesn't make Portuguese better than English that Brazilians use Portuguese. It just means it's better to use Portuguese in Brazil for most uses than it would be to use English. We have a remarkable picture here that I'm not going to really explain much at this point, but there's a couple, like a man and a woman, and the woman is tossing a baby to the man. Check this picture out. And there's like two big rocks that they're each standing on, and between the rock is a big crevice or gap, and they're throwing the baby across the gap. Be very careful if you attempt that at home or in the outdoors of Portugal or Brazil or Texas. Be very careful when doing that maneuver, and make sure you have somebody there to capture it on video. So, to get right with God could be to reduce our attention to customs, or at least reduce our tension about customs. We do not need to worship the customs obsessively. We don't need to worship them by obsessively defending them. Like, it's always better to speak Portuguese, or it's always better to speak English. We do not need to worship the customs by obsessively condemning some particular custom, attacking some particular custom, or reforming some particular custom. So that certain current customs, which we worship as evil, can be replaced by certain other customs which we worship as the key to heaven on earth. If those customs were what was being used by everybody in the planet, then we would have heaven on earth, right? That's a utopian idea. That has little or nothing to do with getting right with God, except to the extent that it's complete distraction and contrary to the idea of getting right with God as I'm presenting that idea. So discard utopian fantasies. Those who tell you that heaven is a future outcome that you should help them produce through political reform and political salvation are misleading you. Even if they are sincere, they are still false prophets. To be more specific, they're using the word heaven in a way that may not be good at all for you. So beware of them. Is that clear? Heaven is eternal. That means it is always available without any required rituals or reform campaigns. Rituals can certainly promote awareness of heaven. Rituals do not bring heaven to someone. They bring someone to notice the eternal presence of heaven. What exactly is heaven? It is one possible human condition. Heaven has often been described, for instance, as peaceful or serene. Can someone already be peaceful or serene? Is a ritual required to be peaceful or serene? Is there any intermediate step required as a prerequisite for eventually being peaceful and serene? Or is serenity always directly available even to one who has been anxious or panicking? Serenity is instantly or directly available, even if it takes like 0.7 seconds. That's pretty close to instantly right there. Serenity, okay. So get yourself together. That's a phrase that I've heard many times. Apparently the idea is that someone is not already together, as in scattered mentally, and then is going to get themselves together. It is a rather strange saying if taken literally. But as long as two people both know what is meant by the saying, get yourself together, it can be a perfectly useful phrase, right? Get yourself together. Maybe extremely close to what I mean by get right with God. It means a certain kind of shift of focus. If focus has been on a bunch of customs and obsessively conforming to those customs, then get right with God could mean to withdraw attention from such distracting trivia, the certain customs that we can relate to as, obsessions. So withdraw attention from distracting trivia and focus instead on being serene. Serene, is that Serena? Focus instead on being Serena, the famous tennis player, Serena? No, not that. Focus instead on a sense of humor is the root of all irony. So, you're distracting me. Serene. Focus. You can focus on being serene. So you can forget about customs, or for the moment, relax any attention to customs. withdraw from fixation in regard to any particular custom or all customs or whatever, and just focus on being serene. Get right with God. Be still and know that I am serene. Serene. That's a great name for like a knight, you know, like a lord, a count. Serene. Oh, it could have been a Monty Python skit. Serene. Serene. All right. So, get right with God. It's a direction. If I say get right with God, that's, you know, a directive. Is it any different from just saying to somebody, calm down? I think it could be. So calm down is just like one thing. It's not. It's just like a momentary intervention. So getting right with God isn't just a momentary intervention. We can think of it as potentially having, you know, bigger meaning than just that. It is approaching a much more comprehensive instruction, like live your whole life in heaven. Live your whole life in heaven. Live your whole life in heaven. Live your whole life where? In heaven. What does that mean? We're not going to get too far into that, but it might have something to do with serenity, grace, attentiveness, even mindfulness. It may mean, when I say get right with God, it may mean to calm down, but it also may mean to take new decisive action. It doesn't mean just calm down and that's it. Calm down and then be open to taking new decisive action, learning new things, with a mode of the innocent child or the curious child or the relaxed child. There are certain patterns of activity that correspond to relaxing our prior attention to social customs. Certain patterns of activity correspond to relaxing our prior attention to social customs. We can withdraw from those people who worship social customs. Even if we maintain those customs, we can withdraw moderately or, you know, completely from anyone who worships any custom or whatever, right? Those who worship social customs, we can withdraw from them. The issue is that people who worship a custom are operating from a particular kind of spirit, a particular kind of background experience of anxiety, like concern for what others think. They are not worshiping a custom because it's actually inherently functional to worship customs. It's actually inherently inefficient to worship customs. But when someone, like myself or anyone else, has a background experience of anxiety and anxiety about what other people think and the potential punishments and criticisms from other people, when there's that kind of a background, then it's one indicator of that would be the worshiping of one or more social customs. So there's an absence of respect for the actual function of the custom. It's just a blind conformity to the particular custom. They actually neglect the spirit of the custom by ignoring the issue of why it exists. Don't concern yourself with why it exists, just conform to the custom. That's the kind of thing that they might say. And there is actually a time for saying that. But if they say, never, ever, ever consider the function of the custom, the origin of the custom, that is potentially an indication of someone who is really not interested in the custom itself and the function of the custom. They're just interested in conforming to some standard out of an anxiety for what other people think of them, out of a concern for punishment, out of a concern for guilt, shame, embarrassment, and these kinds of experiences. They may want to avoid grief. They might want to avoid disappointment. They may want to avoid criticism. So be a perfectionist and conform to all customs, not out of respect for the customs, but out of paranoia, right? Are you hearing all this?
Yes.
So it is fine for people to be loyal to a custom without understanding it. Here's an example. People learn the custom itself before they learn the reasons for it. Naturally, you learn the custom first, then possibly learn the reasons for it. Just like a small child is first taught to only cross a road while holding the hand of an adult. So it works for the child to conform to that custom whether or not they fully understand why. If they say, "Why should I hold the hand of an adult?" Well, that probably means they don't really understand the function of the custom yet, or they wouldn't be saying, "But why do I have to do it?" So get the idea. So a small child is first taught to only cross a road while holding the hand of an adult. That might be a custom that they're taught. Now, is that custom something that's going to be a permanent practice for the rest of their life? No. Does that custom apply to every single road or path or whatever? No, it refers to certain kinds of streets and roads and certain kinds of situations. So there's an idea that the child needs to actually be aware of when does this custom apply and when does it not apply. But they don't need to know exactly why is this custom useful. They just need to know when do you conform to that behavioral protocol, that practice. So the child is trained to conform as a priority. Conform to the custom. Only cross the road when you're holding the hand of an adult. Conform to that, or else you will get in trouble. We will yell and say, "Hey, stop!" and whatever other things. Maybe they'll get spanked or whatever things to enforce the importance of that custom for that child. The child is trained to conform as a priority. And understanding the custom for that child is simply not the first priority. Eventually that may be of interest to the child. Great. When they're ready to ask questions and learn and figure it out, if they want to speculate as to why could that be a favorable thing, that why do those kids over there, you see those 9-year-olds, they don't have to hold somebody's hand before they cross the road, or maybe there's other children who are even their own age that aren't holding the hand of an adult, so they aren't following that custom. So there can be all sorts of comments that a little child could make in regard to the custom of holding a hand of an adult before crossing a road or while crossing a road. All of those are signs of intelligence. Those are normal signs. It's, at whatever point an adult can begin to explore with a child what could the function be of holding the hand of an adult before crossing the road. But that's optional. The first priority is have that child conform to that custom. Later, eventually, probably they will learn why that is a favorable custom, and then they may encourage other children to do it. As an adult, as a parent, they may encourage their children to use that same custom. So one problem can be when people do not understand a custom and yet begin to worship it. I mean, really, people who understand a custom wouldn't ever worship the custom. But if people don't understand a custom and what the function of it is, then they might worship it, often presuming that they understand it. But if they really do understand it, again, why would they be worshiping it? They would just be practicing it, conforming to it. They wouldn't worship it. How do they relate to the custom if they actually don't understand and are worshiping it? Presuming that they understand it, possibly? Well, they may glorify the custom. They may relate to it as a practice that should be universal. Everyone, everywhere, all across the planet, this is a issue that needs to be universally followed in every circumstance, and it needs to be regulated closely, and that kind of initiative can be intelligent. But if done without attentiveness, if actually, there's this idea it should be universal, that's actually weird. Why not have it be on the ballot of lots and lots of create their policy. Here's a recommendation that people consider this, but the idea of a particular custom being absolutely universal for every civilization, for every county, for every human population, that's unlikely. It's just, there's going to be different variations of customs that are going to be relevant for different times and places and so on. Laws change, statutes change. So if someone's worshiping a custom, they tend to glorify it, often relating to it as a practice that should be universal rather than something that's merely customary or routine or functional within a particular context. They have a social anxiety. Oh, I jumped. Is that everything clear here? Okay. So soon they may bully others for even as small an issue as failing to glorify the custom. So if they worship it, they expect everybody else not only to follow it, but also to worship it, to glorify it along with them. That's a typical indicator of somebody who is worshiping a custom, is they bully other people to adhere to that same custom and to really publicly display their loyalty to the custom in an extreme way, to that custom. Obviously there's lots of other customs, and to do any particular custom might mean not doing some other custom. So why are people ever so insecure about whether others glorify a custom? The reality is that they do not understand the custom, and they are attempting to hide that through this public display of glorification of the custom, and everybody else should glorify it too. It's a consensus model that has to do with a lack of understanding of the function of the custom. They have a social anxiety about any lack of conformity to the custom because they're terrified of the possibility that someone might question, even respectfully question, the value or function of the custom. Why are they terrified that someone might question the value or function of the custom? Because they don't want to be faced with having to answer it. They don't know what the value and function of the custom is. They just worship it and glorify it, but they don't know what it's for. They don't know why it's there. They don't fully comprehend it, and they have a anxiety about it. They worship it out of anxiety. As if it's going to get them to heaven is one of the kinds of things that they might say. They probably wouldn't say it in that particular direct of a way. Again, my version of what someone might say, it is sacred. This custom is sacred. Holding the hand of the, only crossing the road while holding someone else, an adult's hand. Even if I'm 23 years old, I need to be holding somebody else's hand for me to cross the road. How can I do that by myself? It's a custom. Everybody needs to hold their hand before crossing the road. And certainly it's fine if adults, in the midst of children, talk about the custom as if it's universal. And as if the adults also say, see, look, I'm holding Grandma's hand, or I'm holding Jack's hand while I cross the road. Everybody does this. It's that's fine as a little display, a theater for the child, right? Totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. But consider someone who says with sincerity and passion and fear and anxiety, this custom is sacred. It is what makes us different. It's what makes us different from those other folks who follow 98% of the same customs that we do, but not the other 2%, which is why they're going to go to hell and we're going to go to heaven, or whatever. In other words, people who worship customs use their public display of loyalty to the custom as a cover to distract other people from the fact that they actually have no idea what the actual value of the custom is. Clear? They simply conform blindly, like a small child who's been trained not to cross the road without an adult. Great, that's useful. Conform blindly. However, in addition to conforming blindly, which is always the first way that people conform, is blindly. In addition to blindly conforming, the worshippers of a custom are also immensely ashamed of the simple fact that they are simply conforming blindly, so they make a big drama with tantrums and bullying and so on to cover the fact that they don't understand the function of the custom. Why do we have a Christmas tree or why do whatever. If you know, Christmas trees, typically people aren't going to worship that custom with intensity, but anyway, the customs that I'm actually concerned about really aren't much religious stuff. I'm making all of these references as if we're talking about religious customs, but for me, they're not a big deal. The customs that I think of as a big deal for people that are quite risky in modern times include the ways that they communicate with other people. Those are customs. We can think of those as customs. The ways that we communicate, the ways that we manage our time, the ways that we manage our finances, our budget. Those kind of customs are actually the ones that are really practical, really make a difference, and, well, everybody else does it, and it's the right thing to do. That's a really inefficient and inattentive way to relate to customs and routines. So if we want to be aware of customs with respect for the actual results produced by them, for the function and value of them, then we're not going to be so concerned about that other people only conform to 98% of the customs that we do. Why is that such a big concern for anybody? In rare cases, something like vaccinations, inoculations, it actually does make some logical sense where there could be a degree of hysteria about a real cultural uniformity in terms of consensus. Compliance, so total compliance, 100% compliance. It is logical in some cases, but in most cases, it's not even logical that there would be an importance to 100% conformity to a particular rule or a particular practice. So those who are worshiping blind conformity or worshiping a particular custom in blind conformity, but ashamed that they're doing it in blind conformity, ashamed that they don't have an actual respect for the custom. They don't have an understanding and respect for the custom. They're just terrified about social criticism. Those folks are far from heaven. They are in the temporary distress of hell. Their blind conformity to customs does them no good in regard to accessing heaven, because customs are not the way to access heaven. Blind conformity to customs, or any conformity to customs, is not the way to access heaven. The child who's waiting for the adult so that they can cross the road together, is not conforming to a custom in order to access heaven. The custom is not related to accessing heaven, in terms of serenity. That kind of heaven, in a state of serenity. No, you hold the hand of the adult because there's something valuable about holding the hand of the adult. The actual, content of the custom has some mechanical value, or some. There's a mechanism in following the practices of the custom that directly is favorable. That's how customs form. That's why customs form. So a child who is waiting for the adult so they can cross the road together, they may be rather impatient. They may be concerned about, should I really be following this custom? I don't think that I need to really follow this custom anymore. But if they're impatient, they still can conform to it. They can wait for the adult impatiently. They can, criticize the adult for being too slow. They can say, I'm a big boy, I'm a big girl, I don't need to wait anymore. And they can still conform, at least most of the time. Maybe they begin to say, okay, is it, they start asking. Instead of I have to hold the hand of an adult, they switch to a new custom. If I ask the adult and the adult looks and says, yes, it's okay for you to go, then I can cross the road without holding the adult's hand. So they shift to a new custom. And in that case, it supersedes the prior custom. So customs can be superseded by other customs that are relevant as an individual changes or as circumstances change. Do you have to hold the hand of the adult while crossing the road? Yes. But if you're at a certain road and you're holding an adult's hand, you shouldn't just step across. Now you have to look to see the little flashing signal that says walk. right? Or has the little picture of the person walking, then you have to learn another condition, another custom. That's what works. So the child can be impatient yet still conform. Their conformity can be very valuable, but worshiping conformity can be an immense risk. I'm not going to really talk in detail about the kinds of risks that can come up in terms of blindly worshiping customs of interpersonal communication patterns or financial practices and so on. They do exist. In other cases, I will elaborate on those. Actually, diet, nutrition, health, also another set of customs. We're taught customs through schools, through media, through advertisements, through maybe through churches. We're taught customs relating to diet. And those customs have value, and blindly conforming to a custom can actually be bad. So if there's a custom or a guideline that, you know, everybody do the following thing, take this particular tablet. Well, actually, you should take that tablet as long as you're not taking this tablet, or as long as you're not pregnant, or as long as you're not an infant under 2 years old. There's often some kind of restriction or condition that goes with these customs, that goes with these guidelines. So conformity can be very valuable, but worshiping conformity, worshiping a particular custom, can be an immense risk. Alertness is a different state than blind conformity. Blind conformity means I'm being attentive to the custom, not to my circumstances, myself. When someone is obsessing about customs, they're not being attentive to what is actually happening in their midst, in their own experience, their emotions, their physical process, breathing, you know, physical stress, tension. They're in a state of latent panic. When someone is obsessing about customs, they are in a state of latent panic, a state of anxious, hysterical distress. And everybody else should be following the same custom that I am, or else it's a really big problem, right? And I didn't follow the. Oh, you remember last Tuesday I didn't follow the custom perfectly. I did 3% of the 97%. Oh man, I feel so. How am I gonna? What am I gonna? Oh, how do I? Hail Mary, Mother of Jesus, give me redemption from this errors of my past Tuesday. Thank you. All right. So when when groups of people get together to encourage each other to neglect actual alertness and logic in order to obsess over whatever customs they agree to worship as the best customs, what do we call that? Or what goes with that? When groups of people get together to encourage each other to neglect actual alertness and logic in order to obsess over whatever customs they agree to worship as the best customs, that can lead to very risky behavior for the entire group. They're like a group of mountain climbers who are operating on a protocol that is relevant for boating. By obsessively doing the things that are very appropriate while boating, they can create immense dangers while mountain climbing. They discard alertness and wisdom in order to have the social validation of the group. Let's all be good mountain climbers together by adhering to the rules of boating. A picture of some mountain climbers there. Most of the pictures that correspond to this presentation are not especially important. The ones those were not even related to mountain climbing. They were like virus generated. But there's lots of pictures of mountain climbing. You see a few different circumstances for mountain climbing, whether there's snow, there's ice, is it dry, is it windy, is it hot, is it cold. All of these different variations for a circumstance of mountain climbing are going to correspond to different practices and different customs. So if there's a group who is loyalist to the boating protocol and the boating customs, and they're going to climb the mountain, and they're going to use the sacred protocols of boating while they climb the mountain, they could say things like, "We are the safest boaters on this mountain. Look at those other fools who are using climbing equipment. Oh, they have special shoes, And they're not even wearing deck shoes. They're wearing like shoes with little spikes that have a lot of traction, and look at those. And they're using ropes for like tying them to each other. Like, what's that about? And they have those little, picks to hit into the crevices of the rocks. Look at those other fools who are using climbing equipment. They don't even know. They're so unconfident in their abilities to properly boat their way up this mountain that they have to use climbing equipment. Ha! So we do not use climbing equipment because we don't need it. We have a sail which will catch the energy of the wind and lift us up toward the mountaintop so that we can go faster and with less exertion. And our way is much better than those people using mountain climbing equipment. What's that about? They're dumb. So these loyalist boaters are not simply proud, like calmly aware of their own level of competence, right? Somebody who's calmly aware of their own a high level of confidence, a high level of competence, will be confident. They will be proud of their learning process that got them to that high level of competence. So if they recently reached a new plateau of competence, then it's reasonable for them to be proud of that. But these boaters who are going up the mountain using the protocols of boating, they're not simply proud. They're presumptive and naive and potentially arrogant. For one person to climb a steep mountain without equipment would be risky, but they would go slowly, so they might be successful. However, it is very dangerous for a group of people to climb a mountain while rejecting the idea that mountain climbing is best done in a certain way, distinct from what works while boating. So if they're adhering to the rules of boating and thinking, hey, this is the safest way to climb a mountain, and they all have that group think or that herd mentality, they can end up doing things that are very dangerous to do while mountain climbing. Not only are they going to miss things that are safe to do that you would normally do, but they're going to do things that could actually contribute to risk and danger. So those who insist on boating their way up the mountain might be overly enthusiastic. They might say everyone should do this and no one should question it. And we should have universal mountain climbing using these boating protocols. Why should everybody climb the mountain? I don't know why exactly, but because it's the right thing to do and because it shows that you're loyal to the boating protocols while climbing the mountain thing. So boaters, these loyalist boaters who are climbing the mountain, they also might ridicule anyone who questions the prudence of using their specific boating protocol while climbing a mountain. And of course, the boaters are going to notice that if there's some other splinter group of the other boaters who are using the other boating protocol for climbing the mountain, and those people are insane, right? Because they're using a protocol that's only 99% right. They have that other 1%. That other 1% is, they're not nearly as good as us. Or maybe it's 94%. Maybe they're 94% consistent with our holy, sacred, only right way of boating the way up the mountain. And they're boating their way up the mountain 94% right, but they have the other 6%, and those people are just, what they are is they're a bunch of boating loyalists. So, those who insist on boating their way up the mountain might be overly enthusiastic, and they might ridicule anyone who questions the prudence of their specific boating protocol while climbing a mountain. Oh, and look at those fools who are using a legal protocol to climb a mountain. They're consulting their lawyers about the best way to climb. What fools! Don't they see that climbing a mountain requires other customs and routines than what is appropriate for winning a court case? So, the boater loyalists can be aware of fundamentalism and fanaticism and blind conformity, but they won't recognize their own history as including blind conformity. Or, well, I was a blind conformist in the 90s, but then I took this one, I went through this one ritual. It was like a 72-hour ritual, and after I finished that 72-hour ritual, it was, the sun dance. And we stuck the little, you know the sun dance? They actually stick, this is completely irrelevant. they stick into the pectoral muscles, they stick like darts of wood, or I don't know if they use metal these days, but traditionally it was wood. And then they have these darts of, I want to get up a little higher, I guess. They have these darts of sticks of wood that are in the top of the pectoral muscles, and then they connect that to ropes and tie it to the top of a pole, and then they lean back and go around and around, and through using pain, they get into a trance state and have, spiritual quests, or I don't know what, visions. That's what it's called. So that's a Native American tradition. I don't know which tribes, but totally irrelevant. Has nothing to do with mountain climbing, which is what we're really interested in here, of course. So, oh no, we were talking about the boaters who were criticizing the legalists. The legalists, yeah, they are trying to get their lawyers to give them advice about how to climb a mountain. That's those people are foolish, right? So the fundamentalists, in this case, let's say the boaters, they have no issue with questioning other forms of fundamentalism. Or they might, that's typical, is they're going to say, oh, look, those are only 99%. They're the Reformed boaters. No, they're not the traditional Orthodox, real, true, authentic boaters. They're the Reformed boaters, and we, reject them. They're actually, even more dangerous than the legalists, because the legalists are obviously crazy. But the Reformed boaters, they're like taking, they're confusing our children and our congregation, and we are really, really threatened by that group. So fundamentalists have no issue with questioning other forms of fundamentalism, potentially. In fact, in order to distract themselves from their own hysteria, they may ridicule the hysteria of others religiously. The legalistic mountain climbers, the ones that consult their lawyers about the proper way to climb mountains, they may gather together and criticize the stupidity of the boater mountain climbers. They may yell taunts at the boaters. How can you people think that you can climb this mountain without first getting a piece of paper and then using ink to make some shapes on the paper that are symbolic codes to specify the nature of your relationship to the mountain? How can you even start to climb without documenting? Do you have an itinerary? Have you had it approved by the county commission? Did you follow the guidelines? Did you use the right, size margins on your piece of paper? You did use English, right? Because in this jurisdiction you can't use Portuguese. You need to have the right kind of permit to climb the mountain. And of course, in some cases it is possible that it's relevant to have a permit to climb a mountain. But in every case, no. In general, having a piece of paper doesn't help you climb a mountain. In my personal experience climbing mountains, and I'm, as probably everyone knows, relatively inexperienced with climbing mountains. All right, so the boaters dismiss the taunts of the legalists, right? The boaters, the boaters aren't attentive to, moderate curiosity and skepticism. The boaters focus on the idiotic criticisms of the legalists. The boaters dismiss the contents of the taunts made by the legalistic fundamentalists, but the boaters are still terrified of anyone questioning their protocols that they worship. They don't actually want people questioning their own protocols. They just dismiss the taunts and the content of the taunts completely. So the boaters may return a taunt of their own back at their critics, right? And what would they say? How can you people climb a mountain without a proper sail? Where is your mast? You don't even have a mast. Where is your anchor? How can you climb a mountain without an anchor, a mast, and a sail? You people know nothing about climbing the mountains the right way. So their criticisms are going to, refer back to their own customs, right? That's just completely predictable. The legalists will make criticisms that refer back to their own customs. The boaters, etc., will make reference to the boaters' customs, and so on. So the boaters feel much better after reassuring themselves that their critics can be dismissed as fanatics and fundamentalists. Now we really know that we are safe and that we are the right way to do it, because we as boaters have now assessed that we're not fundamentalists like those legalists. Instead of acknowledging any intelligent questions, the boaters seek out the most bizarre criticisms to ridicule those critics, and to ignore the presence of actual skepticism, which is the real threat to them and their blind arrogance. Is that clear? I'm going pretty fast, so hopefully that's clear. So the boaters find criticism that they can make fun of and ridicule. They don't actually respond to serious, sincere, moderate criticism. That's the last thing they're going to do. They don't respond to skepticism. They make fun of the ridiculous fundamentalist critics amongst the legalists. That's what boaters would do. I don't mean boaters like real boaters. I'm talking about mountain climbing boaters that are worshiping the protocol of boating. If you happen to be, an enthusiast of boating, that's okay. I think that was implicit, though, right? People understood that already, right? I mean, the protocols of boating are good for, one thing pretty well, not mountain climbing, not winning a lawsuit in court, but boating. So, all right. So these boaters, to avoid admitting the existence of skeptics to the idea that boating protocols are the best way to climb a mountain, the boating loyalists focus on the idiocy of the legalistic mountain climbers and how the legalistic mountain climbers have just such illogical ridicule and criticism. So they don't focus on skepticism, but they focus on hysterical criticisms, fundamentalist critics. And then they, may also really get into a lot of animosity and antagonism with those legalistic critics. But why? They're totally avoiding skeptics and, the curious child who's wondering, why is it actually good to carry an anchor up to the top of the mountain? How is that helpful? So the boaters, they may agree that the legalistic mountain climbers are similar to them and that everyone is climbing mountains. And that obviously is the right thing to do, right? Everybody should be climbing a mountain. But that will be considered a small justification for making a pretense of respect toward the legalists. So the boaters make a pretense of respect towards the legalists. Why? Because the legalists at least are smart enough to be climbing a mountain. Now, they're only 10% consistent with our customs, and 90%, they're really freaking, they're so primitive, right? They don't even have an anchor at all. And they don't even seem to recognize the value of carrying an anchor up the top of the mountain. But at least they're climbing mountains, right? So the boaters will acknowledge this kind of a pretense of respect. It's not. I don't think it's respect. They're actually still relating to the legalists as threats to their pretense of comprehension of their own customs. Clear? So the boaters will say of the legalists, well, they are smart enough to be climbing a mountain, but otherwise they're pretty retarded because they're a bunch of arrogant, blind conformists who don't even recognize the value of carrying an anchor up the mountain. In case, the tides come and oh, that's the cutest picture right there, a little girl climbing a mountain. So she has her safety harness on where somebody else is assisting her and making it safer for her to climb. So there's a potential of collaborating and cooperating all at the same time, so that more than one person can climb the mountain or the hill more effectively than they would be able to do alone. People who are not climbing the mountain, how are they related to by the boaters and legalists? They're generally ignored. The boating mountain climbers and the legalistic mountain climbers do not give much attention to the issue of not climbing a mountain. They just obviously people should be climbing mountains, right? But people who are actually at the top of the mountain, what do the boaters and legalists say about the people who are at the top of the mountain? Not much, or maybe a little bit, but not. They're generally ignored. What's more likely is that the boaters or legalists will complain instead about what other groups nearby to them at that level of the mountain are doing, and we'll complain about those groups, and they're going about as slowly as we are, and they're about at the same point as we are, and we're going to complain about how they're not doing it right. So if we do talk about the folks at the top, the legalists and boaters might briefly agree, though. They might agree about those people at the top. If they do give attention to the people at the top, they might agree. In what regard? What would they say? No. How did those people at the top of the mountain get up there? They must have broken the rules to get there, because we're following the rules and we're not there. They must have broken the rules. They cheated. They are there unjustly. They shouldn't be there. We should be there instead, because we're following the right rules of how to boat your way to the top of the mountain. They cheated. You know how they cheated? By using mountain climbing equipment and mountain climbing strategies and mountain climbing technology, and being attentive to the the terrain of the mountain and all that stuff. Whatever their customs are, those are wrong, and those are cheating. Anybody who uses those mountain climbing customs to get to the top of the mountain, they should be severely criticized, right? Because their methods are unethical, and it's disrespectful of the mountain to wear spikes on your shoes while climbing. It's disrespectful of the sanctity of the mountain. It's going to cause damage to the mountain if you have spikes on your shoes and you walk up the mountain. It's going to cause erosion to the topsoil, and it will make a smooth path, a footpath up the mountain that is easy to follow. And that's going to cause temptation for other people to just walk up the mountain without using proper sailing equipment, right? So the critics amongst the boaters and legalists do not call their criticisms envy. No, they call their criticism justified and bringing about utopia and doing what's right. So the critics do not call their criticism envy. They just agree that the people at the top of the mountain clearly should not be there now because they're using the wrong method. They must have used the wrong methods to get there. So the boaters and the legalists will agree that the mountain climbing experts are doing it wrong. The boaters focus on the lack of the use of a sail by the people at the mountaintop. The legalists focus on the lack of pre-approved climbing itineraries signed, dated, notarized, and filed with the county regulatory agency. So how can those mountain climbers, say that they have any right to be up there if they didn't get the county regulatory agency's approval in advance? They didn't get the UN's approval. They didn't get the mafia's approval. They didn't get the other mafia's approval, the Crips, the Bloods, the federal, the state, the local, the county, the city, the Rotary Club, the Kmart, and let's see, because they're employees at Kmart during the day, and then they want to go and climb up the mountain. Did they get Kmart's employees' approval? What about their grandparents' approval? I mean, how many approvals were they required to get before they climbed the mountain? This is the kind of a question that a legalist could ask. Are you familiar with the use of the term legalist as a type of biblical interpretation? Like legalism and literalism tend to be used somewhat interchangeably, or they're related at least. So it's incidental. As I was creating these examples, I didn't think of using legalism first. First I thought of mountain climbing, then boaters, and then legal scholars or whatever. But legalist is actually a term used by what we would say theologians or whatever analysts to describe certain kinds of interpretive models for relating to scriptures, such as the Bible, the Old Testament, the Quran, whatever. There are legalist interpretations. What do the legalists say to the expert mountain climbers at the top? They say things like, "Come down here right now. Come down here right this instant and get proper documentation from us, or else we're going to sit right here and wait for you to come down to us, because those are some steep slopes between you and us, and all we have is pieces of paper, and you guys have, I don't think we can make it. But you're under arrest, so you guys that means you better come to us and get some documentation from us and get our approval." All right, here's some birds attacking a mountain climber, it looks like. And the legalists and the loyalists and the legalists and the boating loyalists, they all can get together and say how the birds and the wind and the sun and the temperature are all really inconvenient and shouldn't be the way they are. And if only they would follow their customs better and pray to the mountain, then the mountain would not have interfered with them by having such steep slopes. All right, in addition to the various patterns of language used by the various critics, there's also the issue of risk, the actual physical risks of the methods used to climb the mountain. Because groups can form from small groups into really big groups and huge groups, they may end up antagonizing other groups and getting into conflicts. So if you get enough boaters together and enough legalists together and they're close enough to each other, they're going to tend to either repel each other, but if they're really big groups of boaters and legalists, they're going to end up in conflict with each other. It's somewhat likely, especially if they're like, as they're going up the mountain, you know, the territory gets more and more scarce and they kind of have to overlap, and they have to, who's going to go first? They're not going to let the others go first because they're both doing it the only right way that exists, right? According to each group. So further, even without the presence of other groups, fanaticists' attention to issues like conformity to the customs of sailing while climbing a mountain can distract them from alertness to the actual mountain that they are climbing. Not only are they neglecting to be attentive to the mountain, in addition to that, they may be doing things that are extremely risky while mountain climbing. They are not just inattentive to being safe on the mountain, they are oblivious. They may be doing things with tremendous obsessiveness and passionate sincerity and tremendous justification that will predictably be catastrophic somewhere between where they are now and the top of the mountain. Here's my example of a catastrophic looking situation. So people who are smart enough to keep a safe distance away from any group of fanatics are better off than those who rashly climb mountains enthusiastically with a group as the whole group worships the customs relevant for sailing. Clear? These recluses or recluses, these loners, have a better chance of figuring out for themselves what works well for mountain climbing. They are not avoiding learning like those who are worshiping the customs of sailing while being totally inattentive to the actual process of climbing the mountain. So focusing on the customs of sailing is actually a strategy for avoiding learning. It's avoiding getting, quickly skilled as a mountain climber. A loner or a recluse climbing the mountain by themselves will eventually, start to notice what works and what doesn't work in regard to climbing mountains. Now, that can be a relatively slow learning process. What about when a few people who are smart enough to avoid fundamentalism first notice some other loners? How do they react? Oh, also shy people, you can call. How do they react when they first notice other loners climbing up the mountain without a big group around them? Well, there's a variety of ways they might react. They might be hesitant about those other people. They might, say those people are unsafe, or they should have a group with them, right? They might be presumptively critical of others to test those other people for fundamentalism and hysteria. Are they still adhering to the worship of a particular custom? Or a shy person may be eager to interact with other loners and recluses. Even too eager, even extremely enthusiastic, naively enthusiastic. However, no matter what, the recluses are not distracted from learning by fixating on defending certain customs and adhering to certain customs. They will experiment. They will, if they see other people using mountain climbing equipment and then they come across some mountain climbing equipment on their way up the mountain, they might pick it up and start to use it. They will experiment, and through experimenting, they will experience what? Successes and failures. They will experience learning. Slowly or quickly, they will experience learning. So further, there is an ancient legend that the group at the top of the mountain used to be below the top and climbing up. Some people may have been born into that culture. They were already at the top of the mountain when they were born, and so they are excellent climbers because they're closely following the customs that they learned from the mountain climbing culture, and so they're really good at mountain climbing. They might not be good at other things like boating or the practice of law, but they are good at mountain climbing. However, long before that culture and those customs were established, is it possible that there were a few loners who found each other, got themselves together, got right with God, and then created some customs that are effective for climbing mountains? The idea that customs were created by people is considered a simple fact by some people and some groups. Are customs created by people? Are they formed by people and formed by groups and enforced by groups and then changed by groups and reformed by people and groups and updated and revised? Other groups call such accusations that customs were just created by people heresy. How could our customs, which are eternal and proclaimed by God directly to our predecessors, how can our customs be anything like the customs of other groups who also claim that their customs are eternal and proclaimed directly by God to their predecessors? No. Those people are fanaticists and fundamentalists. They're illogical and insane and hysterical and heretical. Now, let's go kill them so they do not confuse future generations of our progeny with displays of curiosity and skepticism. Because skepticism and curiosity, we don't want that kind of thing. That's it's inefficient. It's distracting. It causes confusions because people start to question whether boating is the best way to get up a mountain, and that's heresy. So rumors that the group now at the top of the mountain would ever encourage bickering and warfare among the boaters and legalists. What about those rumors? Have you heard those rumors? That the folks at the top of the mountain would encourage bickering and animosity between the boaters and the legalists? Well, those rumors that the folks at the top of the mountain are encouraging bickering and warfare amongst the boaters and the legalists are quite unpopular amongst the boaters and legalists. According to the tradition of both of those two groups, the theory of a conspiracy to keep the boaters and the legalists fixated on fundamentalism and animosity and customs between the two groups and the differences between their customs, that theory of conspiracy is called by the very evil label of a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy theory that the folks at the top of the mountain would ever encourage the folks at other parts of the mountain to bicker and quarrel and do things that prevent them from coming to the top of the mountain. For both groups, the boaters and the legalists, how do they relate to the theory that their own religious customs were influenced by another group to dominate or exploit them? That's probably not something they're particularly receptive to, right? How do those groups relate to the theory that their own religious customs were created even by another group in order to dominate and exploit the naive and foolish and ignorant and arrogant? It's not popular for any group of loyalists to say our customs, which we blindly follow, were created in order to dominate and exploit us. Not very popular. The boaters and the legalists ignore that theory and focus on the stupidity of those who attempt to climb mountains without the use of sails, when the critics are the boaters, and focus on the stupidity of those who attempt to climb mountains with the use of sails in the case of the legalists, when the legalists are making the criticism. So this idea of a conspiracy theory to divide and conquer the boaters from the legalists, that's not popular amongst the boaters and legalists. Not at all. It's just a conspiracy theory. So those boaters and legalists both worship slogans like "Get right with God." They have no idea why the custom of saying "Get right with God" was started or by whom. They just worship the customary propaganda that they've been trained to worship. What would be really utopian, according to you personally, I don't know if you know that you believe this, but you do. What would be really utopian, according to you, is that if the world was one day in the future permanently rescued from all customs. Customs themselves are the big problem, right? Those who assert that there is such a thing as irony or sarcasm or parody are probably what? Heretics, and just a bunch of reverse psychologists, reserve psychologists or reverse psychologists, and their conspiracy theories can be instantly discarded as no more relevant to mountain climbing than the customs of that other group of fanatics over there who are so unlike us. I said that really quick. Did you get it all? Really? 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 What did I say? That other group of fanatics over there, they're so unlike us, we can discard their practices just as not relevant to mountain climbing at all, just as we can say that the conspiracy theories of the conspiracy theorists must be discarded because they're conspiracy theorists that are just, those people are just conspiracy theorists, and they're just talking about conspiracy theories, and we don't, there's no conspiracy to deceive our own fanatical group. No, we can discard that, because irony and sarcasm and parody are just as bad probably as customs. The existence of customs, we also want to prevent the existence of reverse psychology, customs, irony, sarcasm, English, Portuguese, boating, legalism. So, Those conspiracy theorist people, they're blind. They're disruptive. They're conformists because they all agree. You know, all the conspiracy theories that agree with each other about their particular conspiracy theory, they're just conformists. They're just agreeing with each other out of blindness. They're worshiping trivia and neglecting what is best, which is to climb a mountain using boating protocols. They worship the ideal of what is best with their lips, but they know not what they are doing. They know not what they are saying. Their worship has is irrelevant in regard to noticing heaven. All their research of conspiracy theories that's not going to get them to heaven. Oh, let's tell everybody about the conspiracy theories. No, it won't get you to heaven. Heaven is what? Be serene, and then do what's appropriate. Do what fits. Be aware of the function of customs. Be aware of the effects of actions. So the worship of the conspiracy theories of their conspiracy theory, or theories, is irrelevant in regard to noticing heaven. Heaven, 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 heaven. Or even worshiping of whatever custom, like, you know, proclaiming conspiracy theories. Worshiping of any custom could be totally contrary to the possibility of entering heaven or noticing heaven. It could be a crippling distraction. It could be the avoidance of serenity. To obsessively fixate on a particular conspiracy theory or a particular reform movement or a particular custom of boating the way up the mountain. So I have a couple quotations here in closing from the New Testament. Mark 7:7, their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God. That's also in Matthew, I think, chapter 15. I forget the verse. Mark 7:6-8. So now 3 verses instead of just the one. We're going to have the one before and after that one included. Rightly, this was Jesus speaking according to the writer of Mark. Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Neglecting the commandments of God, you hold to the tradition of men. Neglecting to get right with God, you worship customs, or they worship customs. That was the comment that Jesus was making according to that story. Now he's quoting or referencing Isaiah. Now we'll go back to the Old Testament of the Jewish Hebrew tradition, Isaiah 29:13. Ready? This is the last thing, so if you're not ready, get ready, because we're about to be done here. And if you've enjoyed this video, of course, be free to share it and comment and those kind of things. Isaiah 29:13. Ready? Get right with God and be serene. No, that wasn't it. Well, that's a different one. The Lord says, here's what the Lord says. You want to know what the Lord says? I'll tell you what the Lord says. These people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught. Interesting. Isaiah, a radical guy there, huh? An author, a prophet, a rebel. All right, so this has been Get Right with God, a challenge to worshipers of blind conformity. Hope you've enjoyed it. Have a nice day or night, depending on what time it is now for you, wherever you are.